about this first page, I think behavior is learned. Your players can learn, and we can all learn, and you'll hear me say that over and over again. The first item there, it talks about, it says content and process. And the content, the title of my dissertation was John Robert Wooden, The Coaching Process. I was interested in the coaching process, and it's neat for me to have hockey coaches here and basketball coaches, and I'm a fan of coaching, and I like sports, and I like volleyball, I like basketball, but I like the coaching process. And if you can, for this time that we're here, divide coaching into two areas: the content dimension, which is basically the technical part of your sport in X's and O's, and then the process dimension. And the process is the way that you do everything, the way you interact, problem solve, decision make, treat your standards in terms of discipline, what goes and what doesn't go. And we'll talk about the process. And if you let's say that up here is the content. And if you're coaching your team, I think all of you would always like to be, including myself, you would like to be working on what I call the X's and O's, the techniques of your sport, the tactics of your sport. You'd always want to be in this dimension. But the reality is that sometimes you slip down into, let's say that in my sport I'm working on my right foot forward in some type of a straddle here. I'm not going to burden you with volleyball, but this is a technique that we'd like to be working on, okay? So we're working on this, and then all of a sudden, three players, 1, 2, 3, the star players, they come in again, maybe 5 minutes late, they go drink coffee and so on and so forth. And then they've been doing this all year long. So we're supposed to be thinking about right foot forward, and here these star players are late. We're no longer thinking about right foot forward. All we're thinking about is how come coach doesn't take care of Julian, who's always late? He always does this, and we're down here. We're not dealing on our tactics, our content. We're dealing with Julian being late, or the star players. And then finally, Coach Marv says, "Hey, take 500 laps, go." And then the players go, "All right, he finally took care of it." So now we're back up here, so on and so forth. My point is that you have to develop and maintain the process. You do that early. You develop a mindset. Then the content will take care of itself, and it'll be lasting. You never want to deal with process-type situations at the end of this season. Maybe this is your season right here. You can have some bumps in the road, but pretty much when you're playing for the championships in any sport, championship, I can name dozens of situations that I've been involved in when coaches can come to me and they say, "Marv, what do I do after it's already hit the fan? Once the vase is broken, you can put it back together, but you don't want to." You develop a mindset. If you don't prepare for any other practice, any other class, you prepare for day one. And have the courage to take care of the process type situations along the way. You know what bothers you, all right? And the players know the dynamics of the group, and a lot of times coaches will let it go, and say, well, it'll get better. They practice the art of delay. And the reality is that the players want you to take care of it. And just from an individual player standpoint, if you let an athlete exhibit certain behavior over time, and then you change too late, then you have a half-crazed animal on your hands. I'll give you some, maybe some little bit more application to the process as we go on. I've been involved in situations where coaches have, or regions have brought me in to talk to their kids, to work with their programs, to work with their coaches, from the outside, and it doesn't work. I have a hard time coaching my own team. It's difficult for me to coach another team. I mean, what coaches have done, they've said, Marv, these kids are kind of screwed up. The last year's group was good, but this group is kind of shaky. Can you come in here and fix them? You know, like as if I had a key and I can fix them. And as if there were some magic. And the magic is really not with the kids. The magic would be with the coaches. And this right now for, I don't know if most of you are in season or out of season, but a lot of times what will happen with clinics, out of season clinics, everybody will ask about the magic techniques. And then in season clinics, they will ask about what do I do when Fred reacts this way to Bill's sets, you know, Bill's passes, Bill's shots. There's a different type of question. They ask process type questions in season. They ask for the magic out of season. And when I spoke with Coach Wooden, we talked a little bit about, I've been lucky to have good players, and so we've won a couple championships and good success with USA team. And a lot of coaches will ask, well, how do you deal with, I can't give an exact ranked order, but how do you deal with pressure? How do you win the big ones? How do you motivate? What's your secret to motivate? What's your magic formula? What's your secret formula? And if I had a secret to success or any kind of magic, I would never tell any of you until I'm ready to check out after we've won Super Bowls and millions of dollars or whatever. I could put it in a book, a movie, and then I would sell it. I would, if there was magic, I probably wouldn't give it away. There is no magic. You are the magic, and your players are the magic. And I guess keep that in mind as we chat along. I'm not going to burden you with group theory, but when you're thinking of the process, the coaching process, you have to keep this in mind, that individuals and groups have needs. They have affiliation needs, they have influence needs, and they have competency needs. And I think you know what affiliation is. It's a sense of feeling comfortable, and you're willing to take a physical or a psychological risk, or your athletes are. Influence, they want to have some direction on the group, and if you don't allow them to have direction in a positive way, they may do so in a negative way. Obviously, you don't say, well, who do you want to start at center tomorrow night? You know, that's going beyond the realm of legitimate influence. But, you know, uniforms or pre-match meal or anything like that, allow them to have some influence. And John Wooden, one of the things he used to do is he would take the guards and he would create situations, and he would say to the guards, now, in this situation, who would you like to go to? And the guards would always kind of play out probably to the same, I guess, logic that Coach Wooden had about, well, in this situation we'll go to Rowe, and this situation we'll go to Wicks. And if they ever strayed away from that, then Coach Wooden would say, well, now are you sure about that? You know, and he would go, you know, around the back door to get what he wanted, but he allowed them some influence. Competency. Individuals and groups want the group to be good, but there's an important category here. There's what they call subgroup needs, that individuals that want the group to be good want the group to be good for different reasons. And we as coaches have to identify that. All right, I might want to be good because I want a scholarship. My neighbor might want to be good because he loves basketball, loves volleyball. There's another individual where the parents are pushing him. Another individual wants to go on to the NHL, NBA, Olympic team. There are subgroup needs, and we have to identify that they're all not playing for the same reasons. If we were to go out right now and maybe warm up to play basketball, my guess is that the two of you would probably warm up together if we grouped up. I can't go around the room, but my guess is that you would play with the people that you're playing with, or you would warm up with the people that you know. And whether it's an activity class, a camp, or a team, especially with the team, I always like my teams to develop some type of identity within the team, regardless of ability. And I always designate who does what with whom, and it's highly structured, especially at the beginning. And you think of affiliation. I mean, we're meeting maybe one of those needs, but what you want to have within your teams is you want to have diffused friendship patterns. If I just said, all right, we're going to play basketball, but before we do these 5 drills, let's warm up, pretty much the cool people are going to go with the cool people, the experienced players, and then the young players, the freshmen, are going to go with the freshmen because they kind of look for a spot within the pecking order. And I like to designate who does what with whom over and over and over again, and give them a chance, at least early on, to develop some identity and maybe be good at some things regardless of ability. If we go out and play right away, the ability, the pecking order is kind of established. So we might do some physical things, some things off the court a little bit. I'm giving you some theory there, and if it fits and works for you, grab onto it. But keep in mind the diffused versus centralized friendship patterns. Basically, a centralized friendship pattern is that I say something formally as a coach, and informally, everybody looks at Pascal and says, now what do we do? And he goes, nah, we don't want to be doing that. Or yes, we should do that. That's a centralized pattern, is that everybody here would look at him and get their cues on what to do. It's a click. You might have a click. And clicks are, the best way to treat clicks would be to avoid them because they're pretty tough to break up. Okay. When we talk about behavior, one last thing on content and process. I said behavior is learned. I think you can think of lots of examples where young kids will come to you and say, I'm an old dog, I can't learn new tricks. And I know that this happened to me when I first started coaching. One of my players would be, going nuts on the court, and I'd pull him out, and he would, say, get away from me, that's just the way I am, this is the way I play well. And basically he's saying, I'm an old dog, I can't learn new tricks. And my daughter is 6, and I have a dog named Duke who's 16. And so he was 10 years old when she came on, and she's taught him about 3 or 4 new tricks. And Duke is a dog, and as humans, I think we're able to learn even more. And I like to use that. And let me, I don't mean to jump ahead here, but I think of, I'll talk about 2 types of people, proactive people and reactive people, superior athletes and inferior athletes. And the inferior athletes have a trait that would bug all teachers and coaches. The inferior athlete, the reactive person, as soon as you go to them with some feedback or some teaching, even before you get to them, the red flag goes up. And the red flag means stop. I could go to someone on maybe a basketball, bring your elbow up high, shooting technique, because I see them shooting like this, and before I get to them, they say, I know my feet were too wide. And the defensive mechanism. Some people, there's this continuum, and some are down here, some are up here. The elite athlete tends to listen and to take in and to see what fits. And then they throw out what doesn't fit. They just have a nice little filter there, but they'll be open to the suggestions. They don't want to use you because they want everything on their shoulders. Right, but they'll see what fits for them, and they're open. Superior athletes are usually open. Okay. Number 2, the ability to establish relationships. That's just something that I believe in personally. I think that the success of your teams will be based a little bit on talent, a little bit of coaching, and pretty much the relationships of the players with each other in an interactive sport where you need each other. If you're golf or maybe swimming or tennis, where you don't, track and field, the level of cohesion is not going to be that critical to team success. But if you're thinking of an interacting sport versus a co-acting sport, cohesion is pretty important. So basketball and hockey and volleyball, soccer, so on and so forth. The relationships of the players with the head coach is very important, and just the ability to establish relationships, I think, is real important in sport and in coaching and in life. And I say it to young kids in my camp. They'll come, they'll be 10, 11, 12 years old, and I'll just pick out the ones that are the great kids, and that just meet all the coaches, they meet the staff, they meet other kids, and I see it, and I go up to them, and I like to do it several times a summer. I'll just go up and shake their hand. I'll say, Mary, Fred, you have it made in life. What do you mean? You know, and I'll just tell them that you have the ability to establish relationships. I think that's an important trait. Okay. Number 3, it says 2 types of athletes, 2 types of people. Do we have that? Do you have that handout in there? Okay. Let me go over the B there, the inferior or the reactive. The inferior athlete or the reactive person. It says they don't want to be accountable for their own results, outcomes. Blame is on others, the situation, the officials, the sun, the wind, my teammates' bad sets, bad passes, bad spikes. Usually take the path of least resistance. And also, I'll say the reactive or the inferior athletes don't understand. I don't know how to say this. They do not understand the probability of success. Okay, in any sport. And where I grew up in the mountains. We had no tennis courts, so no tennis, no golf. I love to watch all sports, and let me use tennis as an example. This is the inferior athlete. He does not understand the probability of success in tennis. And I can go up and watch a tennis match, and I can say, without knowing tennis at all, and I'm being honest, I don't know how to play at all, I can say, that's a good player. This is a medium player. This is the inferior athlete who doesn't understand the probability of success. Hits a shot that is out by a meter or 2. Out by a meter or 2. In by a meter. Right on the line. Out by 2 meters. Out by 2 meters. Maybe in. And they just say, oh, I don't know what's happening. I keep hitting that shot and it just keeps going out. They don't understand the probability of success. What is the likelihood of this shot being in the court? All right, this shot going in basketball. In the baseball pitcher, it'd be easy for me to do the pitcher too. You know, what is the probability of success of hitting this little maybe 2-inch black stripe over and over again? I think you have to teach in training. Again, behavior is learned. And you can create some drills in your sport where you can teach for that. And a big part of this, I think, is that you're just talking to them to get them to value certain behavior and not to value other behavior. But I tell you, it's you don't want to load up your teams with a lot of people that don't understand the probability of success or reactive or inferior people, because then you're in trouble. And I always thought, well, if I have one of these guys, maybe 1.5 of my program, I'm going to earn my money. If I get more than that, then I'm in trouble. And if you look at the elite athletes, again, in any sport, they understand it. They're all like this. If they're hitting that, they're not right here. They're right here. Okay, maybe even right there. Just an aside there. Superior athletes want to be accountable for their own results. Team loses, they lose. Don't blame others for their results. And there are going to be good things and bad things that happen in life. All right, and in sport. And if you think of where I'm from, I was speaking with Pascal, we have some brush fires, some fires that come through with the winds behind it, that every 5 years they burn, and the fire goes from wherever it starts all the way to the ocean. And so my area, there will be fires, I know that, and some earthquakes, and we have to pay taxes, and there will be some life and death. That's going to happen in my life. And so in sport, there are going to be some times when we're not going to win every one 15-0, 15-0. There are going to be some bad passes. There are going to be some mistakes. And individually and as a team, and in life, you look at your life situation, it's really your attitude toward those things that count. And what my experience has been with the elite players, and talking to John Wooden, I kind of this is reinforced with some of the great players he had with I don't know, Bill Walton, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, and all the players he had. The superior athletes, in my opinion, I don't know how to say this, if there's ever a chance, even the slightest chance of victory, regardless of the score or the odds, if there's the slightest chance, they keep pursuing that goal. And then once they lose real hard. And then, but also what they do is they bounce back real hard. And versus the inferior athlete who kind of like stays in the mud in the middle and never really wins, never really loses. And I think, again, there's a couple ways that your kids are going to learn. Either you formally are going to lecture to them, or you're going to give them some tradition, folklore, story to get them to value or not to value certain behavior. And I would suggest that you pick some tradition that you have established and build on those traditions. And when I first coached against a coach named Platonov from the Soviet Union, they had won, I think, 6 world championships and several Olympic games. And when the first match I coached against this guy, we won. And he was not a hero, but I respected what they had done, what he had done, and my team was able to beat his team. And I saw him 2 days later, and I don't think that he looked like death warmed over. I don't think that he had slept at all, and I know that he just had a tremendous drinking problem. But what he had done also, according to a writer who I had spoken with, is he had stayed up all night. And they didn't have all the video that we had. They didn't have the computer system that we had, and he did it kind of by hand. And he came back with a team that I thought we were probably 20 to 25% better than his team, but he came back and he changed his tactics, changed his matchups, and he beat us. And I put him into that category of what a fighter he was. And he lost real hard, I could tell, just by looking at him, but he came back real hard. And I always like athletes like that, and coaches like that. Okay, number 4, it says become, don't compare, don't base self-opinion on how others perceive you. I think that's kind of self-explanatory, but a lot of teams, even my team, for example, if we just train in the gym or we play somebody that is not very strong, they look next door at that team and say, oh, we're better than these guys. We're in pretty good shape. And then all of a sudden they play against a team that is real strong, and we're not as good as those guys. You see that happen with young kids all the time, especially the younger kids, where they really don't know what's out there. And they'll come into a camp environment where there's 100 or 200 kids, and they'll do the same thing. Oh, I'm better than Bill there. I'm not as good as Steve. And what you'd want to do is encourage them to become as good as they can possibly be, and maybe have role models that they can, try to emulate. Also, that they should, more important, I think, as coaches, that you should develop standards for you. Structure and standard. All kids, in my opinion, love structure. They know right where the boundaries are, right where the fence is. And without that, they don't really know where they're supposed to be. Kids today love structure, they love standards, and I would develop any statistics or standards for you beyond what you would use for the media. I would have team standards. One of my silly standards that I have is it never shows up for volleyball. It's errors to blocks ratio. When we spike, how many errors do we make versus how many times do we get blocked? And it's just a standard for our team, and I think it's important for you to develop standards for your team, and that you don't play scoreboard, that you become as good as you can possibly be, and don't compare. Let me digress here for a second. I'll make this statement. I'll say it twice. I believe it's not where you are, it's who you are. And when I was in Chicago with the USA team, we played at DePaul University. I remember this one youngster coming up after the match, and he's putting his program in my face. Kind of, there's a group of kids. Most of the kids were around the stars, but there was a group that was around the coach wanting the autograph. And he keeps shoving this program in my face, and I'm listening to him, kind of like hold court with the other kids. And he's saying, hey, he says, I'm always going to be dog meat because I don't have any good coaches around here. There are no good players. The officiating's terrible. But basically, there are no good coaches, no good players. And he kept saying that over and over again. And I never signed his little paper. And he says, hey, he says, I was here before these other kids. And I just kind of looked at him, and I said, I didn't say anything. I just looked at him, and he stayed there. And then when most of the kids were gone, I went up to him and I said, now, do you have any other reasons or excuses why you'll never be any good? And he looked at me and he goes, oh, yeah, I don't have anybody to play with. There's no coaching around here. I'm not in Chicago. I'm out of Chicago. And I took him aside and I said, it's not where you are, it's who you are. And I went through a few things with him, and it was kind of a gamble, but I wanted for some reason to help this kid, and his parents were there. And I gave him my card for his USA coach, and I said, if there's ever anything I can do in any way, shape, or form to help you, you let me know. But then I gave him a few things he could do on his own, and I said, but you have to change your outlook. And it's not where you are, it's who you are. And the parents saw this happening, and I remember looking at the mom afterwards. Obviously, the mom had raised him and loved him, and maybe he's a little bit out of control, but the mom goes, thank you, and gives me the thumbs up, and I enjoyed that. Number 5, identity. How do you get yours? Who you are is much more important than what people think you are. All right, from the outside. Okay, but identity. How do you get your identity? And I'm going to go around this room here, and I'm going to ask. I need an interpreter, I think. But I want each and every one of you to respond to this question, and we'll probably do this once or twice. We're all coaches. We're in this here together. I'm going to come around. If you don't have an initial response, I'll get back to you. But here's the question you're going to respond to. What's the first thing that people think of when they think of me? All right? And I'm going to ask you, what's the first thing that people think of when they think of you? How do you get your identity? What did you get your identity for? What's the first thing that people think of when they think of you? All right, now I'm going to go right to the room, and I'll just point to you, and I'd like you to respond. And Pascal, can you explain? Okay. Okay. All right. Then Julian, then you can interpret for me. All right. Okay. All right. Here we go. What's the first thing that people think of when they think of you? Which is what? Tough. Okay. Trust.
Human.
Sarcastic. Dedicated. Funny. you know what? Before I want you to take. Let's take 30 seconds. We ended right here. All right. I'm going to come back. Take 30 seconds to meet somebody that you don't know. Go. Meet somebody that you don't know. I'm going to use you. Okay. All right, listen up. Okay, now this is going to be. This will take about a minute. Now you have to travel at least 2 meters and meet somebody else you don't know, and it's going to take a minute. Don't fall down on the stairs, but go. Let's get back to all right, ready? We're going to start going around again. Yeah, have a seat. Yeah. Okay, I had you meet somebody you don't know for a couple reasons. One is just to shake out the cobwebs, and also as you travel a little ways, I think, and meet somebody, I could just tell by the volume that in terms of group theory affiliation, now you might be a little more inclined to take a psychological risk and throw out your feelings. You ready? Go. Russian.
Passer ta broche. Easy, oh. Easy the top. Confident. Fast. Human. Tall. Friendly. Shy. Tough.
Yeah.
Funny. Adaptable.
I'm going to ask you about 5 things, all right? That's number 1. First thing I think of is a good friend. Second thing is a chain smoker all the time. Good. All right. Okay. Pardon? Listen. All right. I can tell when I see him. You'd like to have a gentleman like that anytime you speak, because every time I look that way, it's like that. I like that. I appreciate that.
Friendly. Walk. Friendly. Listener. Handicap. Friendly. 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 Good guy. Friendly.
A lot of friendlies here all of a sudden. Pardon? What was that? No. Okay. Come on. Okay. Now we'll go. Maybe depending on time, I'd like to go through that again with you, especially after I talk about just identity and habits and behavior. And there was a player I played with. His name was Bill Hansard. And in Malibu, Malibu is a sleepy little town, and there was one restaurant. It was Jack in the Box came in, and Bill was maybe 2 inches tall, shorter than I am, and at that time we weighed about 220 pounds. And after every practice, the Pepperdine University did not have its own gym. We had to drive into Los Angeles. We would stop at this new restaurant, and Jack in the Box, and he would eat maybe a dozen, 12 hamburgers, and he gained some weight, and now he's my age. He's 45, and he only weighs about almost 300 pounds, but he's ready to check out. He's ready to die, and he got his identity, whether it was breakfast, lunch, or dinner, or after practice. He ate 4 times a day for how much he could eat. And of friends, peers, and also of your athletes that they get identity. If they get identity for something in this day and age, if it's humor, they'll try to be more humorous. If it's how much they can eat or drink, or the variety or the speed of the drinking or the drugs or whatever, they tend to keep going with that. And what I suggest to the athlete, that's why I always throw out role models and get them to value certain behavior, not value certain traditions, is that they should get their identity for something good. So if we went around the room and said, what's the first thing you think of for maybe a Gretzky or a Michael Jordan or a Larry Bird, you would give some traits that are probably very positive traits. And that's how you'd want to get your young athletes to get identity for something that they're very good at. And let me go that a little bit further with that. When I was, I don't even know how old I was. I was probably 19. I was drafted into the Army, and when I was 20, I went to Vietnam. And when I was in Vietnam, I was drafted, and we had a thing called guard mount. Before we went out to the perimeter, we went through a guard mount where they come and they'd look at everything. And so the guy looks at me, and I'd been in country about 8 months. My boots were rotten, my fatigues were rotten. I hadn't shaved for a couple days, and he looks at my weapon, and my weapon was filthy. And then he says, base. And I'm supposed to say hit, it's a password. So if you challenge somebody that you don't know, you say base, and I'm supposed to say hit. I didn't even know the password. And he says to me, he said, soldier, he says, I haven't found anything right with you yet. Then he goes to the next guy and stands in front of the next guy. And it wasn't a boot camp type situation. It was a real important situation because we had to know how to call in artillery. And we had to have intelligence reports of the area. And so he goes through a few more guys, and we're all kind of, the same situation. And I won't use the language that he used, but he said this. He stops about halfway through, and he says, gentlemen, he says, the Army is really F word, okay? And we were drafted, and we said, yeah, we know that, but why, this guy's in for life, why is he saying that? And he hooked us. TV is called a hook. And but all of a sudden we started listening, and he said this, and he said it to us twice, and I'll remember it forever. He says, whether you know it or not, and I'll say this for you too, the way you're sitting, standing, whatever you're doing, whether you know it or not, or whether you like it or not, the habits that you're developing right now will be with you for the rest of your life. And then he said a few more things, and then he said it again, then he walked away. And I tell you, I grabbed onto that, and I took advantage of it, and I changed. And I say it to my kids, and I see them changing a little bit by little. And it's interesting, one time after I was done coaching the USA Olympic team, I finished in 1988. In 89, we went to a thing called the World Gala, which is the Olympic team plays the stars in some phony match. And but anyway, what I did is I took advantage of the time to sit with each athlete, and I said, how'd you get good in the sport? What drills did you like? What coaches did you like, and why? And I went through everything. And how'd you get good in the sport? And there's one kid, well, first of all, with the drills, they all liked the multi-skill, multi-contact drills, each and every player. They didn't like the one contact with artificial ending. But this one player who I had at Pepperdine, his name was Bob Staverlik. And he says, oh, Marv, he said, you know, he said, the weight room was here, the video was here, your office was here, everything was right here. It was a nice little package. And I said, well, I know that, but how did you get good in the sport? And he thought for a minute and thought for a minute, and he says, I know how I got good. And I said, what? What's the magic? And he said, I gave up TV and I only drink water. And I said, what does that have to do with anything? And he said, when I tried out for the USA team, he says, those kids from SC and this other kid, they would watch TV after practice, before work, right? After work, before weights, and after weights. And he said, all they did is watch TV. And Bob was making his little real estate deals. You know, he was always on something. And he said, also they drank sodas. They drank sodas after practice, after weights, after work, and then they'd, you know, go out and drink at night. And he says, all I drink is water. And so I share that story with my team. I'm talking about a couple other things. And I'm on a flight, and this is last year, with one of my players. His name is Tom Sorensen. And I see he has a bottle of water he's carrying around. And I think it's kind of trendy to do that. But anyway, he's carrying the jug of water. And I said, what are you doing? He goes, well, I'm like Staverlik. I only drink water. And it was a good trait that was passed on, a good habit. In other words, he took something that was positive from an individual by chance. And it wasn't something that was premeditated on my part, but it was a good trait. And knock on wood, hopefully, you know, he'll continue to do that. And I say down there, habits. You know, behavior is learned, and you know, I'll say that over and over again. One of the rarest things that people and athletes ever do is do the best they can. And I'll say this, one of the hardest things that I have to do, this is what I'd say to my team. Because there's so much more time spent in practice than in playing, that you're really going to get better in practice. The hardest thing that I have to do is to get us to train at the level that we need to in order to be good or to be great. And the only pressure, and I'm being honest with you, the only pressure I ever feel as a coach is, am I training these kids the right way? And you know, basically, your matches, your games are won Monday through Friday. You know, if talent is in the ballpark with the opposition. And I'll go back to the elite athletes, the superior athletes. They kind of have it figured out. If they're going to spend 2 hours, let's say 2.5 hours, in a practice environment, they are going to take advantage of it. They have it figured out. And there were guys on my team who didn't have it figured out, that I always had to kind of kick, you know, or like, now it's your turn to kick, and I give them to my assistant coach. You know, you get them going this week. And we had a guy named Craig Buck, big, maybe 6'7", 6'8", middle player for us. And what we would have to do is invite in junior highs, you know, and bring a bunch of kids or girls into the gym. And then all of a sudden, his, you know, work ethic went up tenfold. You know, people have different buttons, but usually what I found, and what I find, is that the good ones, the great ones, they have it figured out. It's kind of like driving to work. You know, some people fight that drive, but you have to do it. Or the dishes are dirty, right? And they grind and grind and grind, but you know, it's going to have to be done. And I said this one time when I met with Karch Karai, one good player that I had in '85 through '88. He'd already won a gold medal, and he was well skilled in his position. And we identified some things for him in life and in volleyball. We crystallized his goals, and I said, "What do you want to do?" And he was thinking of med school, and he said, we agreed that he was going to take volleyball as far as he could take it. And we said, now what do we have to do to get there with you? And he had to lift weights, because he was only maybe 180, 185 5 pounds, and now he's about maybe a solid, maybe 210, 215. But I told him, I said, Karch, we're going to be together for 4 years. And I said, either when we're together, you're either going to get better or you're going to get worse, and on a daily basis. And, oh, I don't know, must have been 2 years down the road, we were at some city and we went into, I don't know if it was newspaper or TV, and they were asking him, how do you do it, you know, for so many years and so long? And he says, well, the way I figure it, either I'm getting better or I'm getting worse. And he kind of remembered that from years ago. He bought into it. I think you have to logically sort out for the players your training and their time in training, and get them to develop some good habits. Number 6, narrow focus. I think in this situation, that's a positive. Sometimes a narrow focus, you may be considered, oh, they have such a narrow focus they can't see the whole picture. Obviously, your ability to see the whole picture is real important. But a narrow focus in every sport, and I don't know all sports. I like to watch coaches in all sports, but for me, it's real important to read the initial speed of the ball, whether it's a server serving the ball, or more so a setter setting the ball. If you think of volleyball, the initial speed of the setter of the set ball determines whether it's a quick set, a combination, or an outside set. And the earlier you identify that, the better off you are. And that's a narrow focus. Instead of as a blocker just kind of watching everything, I have the ability to focus on this one important part of the game. And I find that pretty much that the players have the ability to do it on the court and off the court, and it carries over. And an example I like to use it, that to receive serve, anybody can do something well one time, all right, but the great ones do it well over time in whatever the sport, whatever they do. And so in receiving serve, we had Staberly Karai, 2 guys, and they had to do it well over time, and to focus over time. Tremendous focus in the gym. And then one time we were in Chengdu, China, flying back to Beijing, and in China, the flights that we were on, outlying areas, they were overbooked, and they left them overbooked, and we would take off, and you know, somebody would slide by in the aisle, and it was a situation where the plane never got the flight was about an hour and a half, something like that. But the plane never got above really treetop level the whole time. We were looking out the window, and we could see the tops of the trees, and we would get up a little bit and go down, and everybody was thinking that they were going to breathe their last. And here was this guy, Karai. He's reading a book, and he was like this the whole time. And Staberlik was on his little laptop computer, and we landed, and everybody was so happy. And those 2 guys, just by chance, it fits the story, they didn't even know what had happened. And it was unbelievable to me, and I saw that early, and I saw that over and over again. And that's a great trait to have. Number 7, know where you're going, why you're going, and how to get there. I make up overviews, and I wish I had included one from either the university season or more so with the USA team. The overview is just that, an overview, and I share it not in great detail. I share the general overview with the players, and it takes a long time to develop the overview, and so I want to share it, and I get their input, and I think it's important to listen to your players. We always had somebody on the staff that would listen to each and every player. We kind of divide up. And when I came on to the USA team, several players had already won maybe 200 or 300 international matches, and I'd yet to coach one. So, you know, I made sure that I listened to them. But overview and a plan is real important, and your plan is important, but as important as your plan is, or your matchups, your technique, your tactics, whatever, your systems, I think it's as you get closer to championships that I think you have to have a plan, because they're used to it, and it kind of lowers the anxiety level of your athletes. Courage. A lot of you said that you were tough, and as a coach, and I'm jumping into John Wooden here, but the most important thing I think as a coach, the most important trait for me is that you are consistent. In that there was a football coach in the United States, his name was Woody Hayes, and he was real tough, used to slug some players once in a while, I guess, but he was consistently Woody Hayes, and I think that that's real important. And what I found is that with sarcasm, cynicism, and even witty or humor, that I had to back off on a lot of those, especially even like my wit or my humor, because some of them would get it, some of them wouldn't. And I think it's important. I think it's real important to be consistent. The courage. I don't know, each and every one of you can come up with an example of courage, and I'll just share that one guy I worked with, whose name was Doug Beal. He started the training center concept for volleyball in the United States in 1976, and then again in 1980 in another city. And he was building the program, and he was the first of the new. Anytime you're the first of the new, people are after you. All right, it's much tougher to be the first of the new as opposed to the last of the old. Well, he was the first of the new, and when the team all of a sudden in 82, 83, the USA Olympic volleyball team started to have some success, some of the parents and some of the players and maybe some other coaches wanted him out because his standards were too high. There were no Walkmans, as the team was going around. There were no sunglasses in planes and airports and so on and so forth. When you stood, and I didn't see my players last night, but during the national anthems, regardless of how we feel about the anthem or you, my players better have their hands at their side for both anthems. And I didn't look because the players were behind me because my hands were at my side, but there's a standard to be met. And I didn't see a lot of the Olympics last summer, but I hope that standard is still intact. Doug Beal, they tried to kick him out. Here's a guy that worked 24 hours a day, and they tried to kick him out because he was too good. Not because he was terrible, but because he was too good. And he stayed. They won a gold medal. And then he's my boss, 85, 86, 87, 88. And the players would come to us and say, hey, how about some extra money for this? How about if we get cars that are insured or licensed or whatever? And how about a training table? And we would go to Colorado Springs, and the leadership there would say, that's great, go ahead, we'll do that. And then 6 months would pass, and the players would say, hey, how about the training table? And we'd go back to Colorado Springs, and they'd say, screw the players, we don't have money for that. So we'd go back and meet with the players, and the players would say, how come we're not getting the training table? And Doug Beal says, because I said so. And they'd say, hey, you said, and he goes, we're not doing it. And they'd say, why? He said, because I said so. And month after month, year after year, this would happen, where the two people in the Springs, 2 or 3, whatever, would allude to something, and would be able to come through. They would change whatever, the budgets or whatever. And Doug would go back, and he would take all the heat in the world. And to this day, none of the players know. The players still don't realize, some of them do, what tremendous courage he had. And when we would select coaches for elite teams, university teams, B teams, whatever, we'd have the panel of experts, and everybody would be slicing up who we were going to have. A lot of it was political, but some of it was logical. And Doug would just sit in the corner, and he'd wait. And we'd go to him, and Doug, what's your opinion? And he'd go, does he have the ability, does she have the ability to make the tough decision? That's all he wanted to know. In other words, all he wanted to know is that, does this person have the courage to take care of what needs to be taken care of? And I don't know if that's a great example, but I try to throw in a coach. I think as a coach, there's a movie that I like, The Wizard of Oz, and one of those characters in there needed courage. And I'd like to share that with you. As a coach, you have to have courage, not to dehumanize. It's really easy to work over the kids, and in some cases, I think that we teach like we were taught, or we were coached like we were coached, and in some cases we don't. My assistant coach, who's here with me now, he's a legend in California for training setters, and when he was the USA women's coach at the '67 Pan American Games in Winnipeg, '67, yeah, and then '68 Olympics, he had in '66, '67 the best team in the world, and they didn't lose a game at the Pan Am Games. I learned a lot from him. I learned about not changing lineups. But let me tell you where he was when he started. When you traveled on the bus to the match, you sat in rotation. All right, there was left front, middle front, right front, and you sat in rotation. And when you ate a meal, you sat in rotation. He carried it obviously too far, but there was something to be said. Something to be said for not changing. And when I was a USA coach, the Pepperdine coach in USA, I'm real slow to change. I spent a lot of time putting players in positions, testing, and once I put them in there, somebody's going to have to really work hard to beat them out. And I was always criticized, mostly in Southern California, not so much in the international arena, because we won, but people were saying that was a weakness, and I thought it was a strength. Anyway, how did I get into that? Okay. Number 9, respect individual differences. I love this statement by Thomas Tetko. No matter what level of play, nor at what point in one's career, athletes and people never lose the desire to be treated as individuals. I went to a clinic, it's called the Stovall's Clinic in Anaheim, California. 10,000 coaches were at this clinic. And they have a section for, it's in a huge convention center, a section for every sport, for fitness and for plyometrics and so on and so forth. Then they have a general meeting, and they bring in one big-time coach. Years ago, I think it was, I want to say 77, 78, they had a coach there named Red Miller, and he coached the Denver Broncos. And they were medium, and then all of a sudden, when he coached them, they went to the Super Bowl. And they were still medium. They scored a field goal, and then Dallas scored 33 points and won 33-3. They should not have been in the Super Bowl. And so Red Miller is talking along, and I never asked questions with 10,000 coaches. I think only about 7,000 were in the arena. But he said this statement. He goes, in some way, shape, or form, I acknowledge the presence of every individual in my program every day. And I was kind of listening. I said, what? How? And I raised my hand. I said, can you repeat that? And he said, in some way, shape, or form, he acknowledged the presence of every individual on his team every day. And I'm only training 12 volleyball players. And in football, he had 65. I never see the second string. I mean, I go a few weeks or a few days without talking to these kids. And I thought it was interesting. And I got him in the hallway afterwards, and he said what Tutko said. He said, hey, if I was a business guy, he said, I would know everybody's name in the whole business world. And he said, with my team, he says, I don't go up to each and every guy and say, I'm acknowledging your presence today. I mean, you'd almost have to, based on the numbers. And he gave me some examples. And I changed a little bit. And I try to do that because they never lose the desire to be treated as individuals. And one thing this old coach said to me early on also is that you have to respect individual differences. And I think the degree to which we do that on a team, your team is positively affected. And also, it's not on here, but I think role clarity is real important. And the opposite of role clarity in a team is role ambiguity. And you never want to have role ambiguity where the players don't know, where they are. I think it's real important to have roles. And in talking with Coach Wood, and I spent 2 weeks with him, that's what came through to me over and over again was role clarity, and he let them know and got them to develop roles and also to value their role. But role clarity is real important. And I even got to the point where I say this to the players. I mean, not hardcore because it hasn't happened for years. But when I was a younger coach, I really struggled with it because I didn't have the courage to just kind of lay it out to the kids. But then I started to say, Julian, here's your role as I perceive it. Do you accept your role as I perceive it? It's mandatory that you accept your role as I perceive it. Otherwise, you have to leave the program. Your role can change if he breaks his leg and he starts playing poorly. But I put the monkey on his back. Do you accept your role as I perceive it? And then he says yes or no. Because a lot of players will come up, hey, what do I need to do to start? What do I need to do to play? What do I need to do to score more points? Or when do I get the ball? And they'll put the monkey on your back. And if you take those monkeys and you teach and coach, pretty soon your day is going to, you're going to be burdened with lots of monkeys. And they don't grow. All right? So then I throw it back to them. And that's a legitimate question, but let them work on it. Role clarity is important. Maximize strengths, number 10. I don't know how you teach your athletes. Either you work on all their weaknesses that you have identified, they've identified, or you find a strength that they have, and can you still hear me? Is this still working? Okay. All right. I like to maximize strengths. If somebody is good at something, I keep going with it. And examples, I don't know any examples. I know one thing. We had a guy named Sato, little guy, jumped real well, and he had a jump serve that was real good. All right, good jump serve. So we said, hey, you spend all your time jump serving. And then by chance he came up with a jump knuckle float. In other words, he wouldn't hit this topspin, he would just act like a knuckleball. And everybody would laugh. This is years ago, maybe 7, 8 years ago. Everybody would laugh when he would do that until they started passing the ball off their neck. And he maximized that one skill. And if somebody's good at something, I just keep pumping them up, I like to maximize strengths. And obviously, you have to work on some areas for improvement in certain athletes. But if they have a strength, build on it because they like to do that. They like to do things that they're successful at. 11, ability in class and ability. I share that one of the coaches I played for 2 fossils. I say 2 legends, but 2 fossils because they're both so old and yet they're both so great. One guy said, silly little things that were real important. He said, gentlemen, be prepared to win, be prepared to lose. But class and ability and class over time. He said that's what's important here. And he won at whatever level he coached. And I'll never forget that. At the time, I thought all the little things that he was saying were silly. But if he didn't say them, we missed them. Before a match, and we knew when he would leave something out. But he always talked about be prepared to win, be prepared to lose. Class and ability, or ability and class. Those are the things that intimidate. And I remember playing in various countries, whether it was the Soviet Union, Cuba, Brazil. Sometimes we would get into it pretty good with Cuba, and I would say to my guys, I'd say, hey guys, back off. We're reacting to what they're doing, and ability in class is what intimidates. And we used to, when we would do something well, we started to change and just kept it on our side a little bit more. And they kind of self-destructed, at least at that time. Anyway, those are the things that I think intimidate. I don't think yelling and certain behavior intimidates as much as if somebody's good at something, then we might be in trouble. Or if somebody has a lot of class and we can't get to them, if they have no class, they're in trouble. If they have no ability, they're in trouble. But if they can have class and ability, then we say, aha, we have a match on our hands here. Let me skip to number 13, success patterns, and I'll go back to 12. As parents, teachers, coaches, leaders, I think, just especially as parents, let me say as parents first, that as parents we always put our kids in situations where they'll be successful. Whether it's the right class, first, second, third, fourth grade, whatever, or the right teacher, or the right youth and junior coach, the right tutor. And when we play little card games, I don't know what kind of games, let's just say card games, I don't know what kind of card games you play, but we put them in situations where maybe they'll struggle a little bit, but where they'll be successful, even sometimes where you make it a little bit phony, where they can experience some success. Because you want them to know what it takes to get there, what it feels like, and therefore they'll repeat it. Success patterns are real important, and sometimes we get away from that as coaches, and then maybe we coach like we were coached or taught like we were taught, which in some cases, most cases, hopefully it's good. Some cases, maybe it's not so good. And if this is my volleyball team and I was going to teach you how to pass, I'm teaching two guys how to pass now, I would just throw a ball to that corner and have you run and pass it. Throw it over to that corner, run and have you pass it. And I would say, you can do it, Johnny. And just say, yeah, we can run the quick option. You can do it. I would care less about tactics. I would just build a confidence there in doing that. And again, when I interviewed the players on the drills that they liked, here were these, very successful international athletes, and I said, what were the best drills? And a couple of them had me earlier on as a coach. They said, I like that one the best. And I had all these magic passing drills with technique. That was the one that the three of them, Rig, Tanner, Staverlik, all liked. They liked the one where somebody, either I or somebody else with me there, would put the ball anywhere in the gym that they could handle and bring it back. They'd pass it back here. No magic, but what it was is I was putting in a situation where they were experiencing success, and they got it from me too. And I said, you can do it. You can pass it. You can. And it was a silly little drill where they experienced success. And no matter what standards you have, okay, whether you use so many in a row, plus minus, so many out of total of 10, whatever, I think you have to keep success in mind. And I find that, I don't know what percentage, but a significant percentage of coaches and teachers that will work in my camp, I use about 25 or 30 instructors a summer. A lot of them don't have that. I mean, you have to be yourself and do what you believe in, but a lot of people believe differently, and I struggle with that. And I said, well, when you're here, I want you to do it my way, and because I think it works. Competitive greatness, going back to 12. We can make kids a little more spontaneous. We can add some game intelligence, some court intelligence, and we can develop and add some competitive greatness in our training. And I've seen it over and over again. Not all of them we're going to get to where they're great competitively, but some of them are just kind of based on their family, based on their upbringing, they have it. And you'd want all your players to have that. But keep in mind that you can train that, and by putting them in drills that are tough drills, that demand a lot, and you're scoring the pace and the rhythm, whatever, of your training, your drills, I think you can do that. And this Sato kid, we weren't, when I was the USA coach, we were not the biggest, the fastest, or the strongest, but I thought we were probably the most spontaneous, and we were fairly tough. And this little Sato kid, whenever I wanted to win a game or a match, tournament, whatever, I'd put him in to upgrade the team. I didn't want to substitute. If somebody was doing something poorly, I didn't want to go like this and get him out, because then he's kind of waiting for the hook, and then who plays and who doesn't play. It's just the coach is rolling the dice. I don't like to do that. I'll leave a kid in there until he's dying and the team's dying, because I want him to know, hey, you've earned that spot, and maybe it was for the final match of the year I'd make a change, but in the meantime we're keeping it as we are. But this Sato guy, for years, all he did in practice was play defense and serve the ball and play defense. But he got to where he's very, very good, very specialized. And every time, every game, he played almost every game, every match, every month, every year. Whenever he served, I would give him this signal. I'd either say, hey, he'd look at me, I look at him. Just put it in. They're messing up. Let great players have a chance to play. Just put it in the court. Because pretty much we had control of the situation. And then there are times when we were playing in France in 86 and 87 had a great team and a great setter named Fabiani and a great offense. And they'd side out forever and drive us nuts, and we were trying to figure out what to do to stop them. And I'd say, hey, they've sided out 60 times in a row. Eric, go in, go for it. And so he'd look at me and I'd give him thumbs up. All right, go for it, hit it, make something happen. At the Olympic Games in Seoul, we got to match point, and here goes Eric Sato in. And I don't know what the Soviets had, but we had 14. And I'm looking at him. He doesn't look at me. He jumps up, hits the ball, and we score. It was the overpass, and we score. And I go to shake the hand of the Soviet coach. The team's jumping up and down, and out of this mass, this big pile, comes Eric Sato. My eyes catches his eyes, and he gives me. He comes to me with that. And it was just, I'll remember that much more so the Olympic Games. And we both knew when he was going back to serve what I was going to give him. All right? And it was kind of, he enjoyed, I thought maybe he just hit it. And but he remembered, and he gave it to me. That was kind of fun, kind of special. But competitively, he was great. And in training, he was great too. It's not on your list. I like at a senior breakfast for a graduation senior breakfast. One of the ladies in education gave a speech on the qualities of an encouraging person, and when she was speaking, I was going, I really like to be around people like that. I really like players like that. I like coaches like that. And afterwards, I went up and I said, hey, could I have that speech, the notes for it? And she said, sure. And so she sent it down to me, and I haven't really used it because it's her material, but I think that it's fun to be around encouraging people. And I'm not, when I was younger, or in certain situations, I can put steam in the boiler, but pretty much I like to, in terms of motivation, I like to provide the right sequence and the right atmosphere, and not put so much steam in the boiler. And tricks and gimmicks are kind of momentary, but I'm always reminded by this gal about encouraging people, and I try to do that in my training and with my teams. 14 there says investment. I've already kind of talked about that. There's a song, I think it's good. Some people win, some people lose. Good time, Charlie's got the blues. You want to really win in sport and life, you have to invest yourself and take the risk to really gain or to lose. And you don't really get the full experience unless you do both. Okay, I think what we'll do is we'll stop here, and then whatever time we have, I'll go start talking about wooden, and then maybe have some exchange. But I think we'll take a little break. Okay.
On va prendre un petit break de...
What's that?
Let's take a little 10-minute.
Okay, 10-minute break. But also, as we take the 10-minute break, I'm here to talk about sport and coaching. I'm not going anywhere, or even afterwards.
Mike McCann, the basketball coach.
Oh, great. What's your philosophy? Oh, you know what? We didn't get to the second thing that people think of.
It's kind of a scary question.
Oh, you know what? Yeah. But you know what? With kids, first thing I like to do, you that don't know, John Wooden, in basketball in the United States, he won 10 national championships, and he won 7 in a row, or his teams did, and very successful coach. When I was younger, I would watch his teams play, and I found that I watched his coaching style as much as I watched his teams. And when I first started coaching, I was Marv Wooden. I tried to be Marv Wooden, and it didn't work. I mean, it took a day or two, and I found out it didn't work. But I think we can borrow from others and learn from others. I got my master's at USC, and then I went to Brigham Young for my doctorate. And when I was working on my doctorate, the coursework was coming along well. And for my dissertation, I was going to do something like leadership, cohesion, and competitive team success. And basically, I was going to prove that A was better than B. And I got stuck. I didn't enjoy it, didn't like it. And I went to the chairman of the department. My advisor couldn't help me. And I went to the department chairman, and I said, I need your help. And he says, why are you here? And I said, well, I'm here so I can earn a degree and therefore make more money when I go back to Pepperdine. And he kind of laughed, and he said, well, in addition to that, why are you here? What would you like to know? And I said, you know what? I'll come back to you tomorrow. I'll think about it. And I came back the next day, and I said, you know what? I would like to know how the great coaches coached or the great coaches coach. And I said, I always sit and I kind of watch, and I go to clinics, and he says, well, you could do some sort of a historical study, but it would have to be on somebody in the States, somebody like a Naismith who started basketball, or Newt Rockne in football, or something like that, or John Wooden in basketball. And all of a sudden, I said, I met him one time. I might go to the dissertation abstracts and see if there's anything that's been done on him. And I'm sure that I was sure at the time that somebody had done a study on him, but no one had. There's several books, but no one had done a study. So I made up a page, actually 2 pages. The first page was to introduce myself to Coach Wooden, and the second page was to introduce the study that I wanted to do. And so the first page, I could not call him up and just say, because he was such a hero, such an idol, I couldn't call him up and say, John, this is Marv. And so I said, Coach Wooden, and he said, speaking. And I started to introduce myself, and I wanted to go nonstop, so he didn't hang up, whatever. And when I did stop, which is about 1/4 of the way down the page, he says, Marv, he says, I know you. He says, this was in 1978. He said, we met at the pool at Pepperdine. And that was the one time I did meet him. And he said, congratulations on your championship. We had won 6 months prior to that. And all of a sudden, then I'm feeling real good. And I had to skip down my page and say, well, where do I go from here? And then I introduced my study. And I went through it again with holding my breath. So he wouldn't say no, and until he heard all of it. And when I'm finished, he says, there's a pause. I finish, and I'm waiting, and he said, to be quite honest with you, I'm honored that someone of your caliber would want to do this on me. And I just exploded. Remember, I was playing intramural basketball at the time, and I just floated down to the court. I mean, it was in between games, and I just floated down there, and they said, how did it go? And I said, it went pretty well. And they said, well, what do you mean? I said, I'm doing it. Anyway, what I did is I went through all the books that I could find, all the coaching books, which in the States are not a lot of good coaching books. I don't know why. There aren't a lot of... It's something that, like parenting, and we don't really... formally train people to be parents, and we don't, at least in the States, train people to be coaches. We dabble in physical education, we teach kinesiology and motor learning and exercise physiology, but we don't do a very good job in training coaches. It just kind of happens. Anyway, I identified about 150 items in coaching, none of them basketball. All right, just coaching, recruiting, player selection, training, dealing with assistants and discipline and so on and so forth. And then I reduced it to about 100. And I went to Coach Wooden and with my tape recorder and these questions. And the plan was the coaching process. The title of it is John Robert Wooden, the Coaching Process. And I was going to ask all of his former assistants from 1948 when he started coaching to 1975 and Coach Wooden, first of all, document his philosophy and on each of these items, and then find out how they implemented that philosophy. What did he do? What did you do? What did both of you do? What did neither of you do to implement the philosophy? So I sit with Coach Wooden. We agreed to start at 9 o'clock. And the first thing I asked him, I think, was on recruiting. Second item was player selection. Well, I started at 9, and at 3 o'clock, I'd gone through all my tapes, and he had yet to finish responding to my second question on player selection. From 9 until 3, we had talked about recruiting and player selection. And then that was 1980, and I was a grad student, and I'm looking at my tapes are gone, and I have to get them transcribed, and I have 98 more questions to go. You know, what am I going to do? And sometimes when you get closer to people, what happens, you go, yeah, that isn't the reason. The assistants, this guy had great assistants, or this guy had great talent, or maybe the athletic director was strong, or whatever. As I got closer to him, I found out not only was he an elite athlete himself and a great competitor, so he knew the psychology of the superior athlete, but he knew the coaching process. There wasn't anything that he wasn't in 100% control of. And when I talk with his former players and assistants, especially the assistant coaches, they'd say things like they'd be playing for a national championship and the anxiety level would be way up here, and Coach Wooden would walk in, and within 10 seconds they knew they were national champions just by his presence. He had tremendous presence, which was based on I think his Midwest upbringing and the lessons in life that he learned and passed on. He knew the psychology of the superior athlete, and there, you know, we could talk for a long time today, and you know, maybe some of you'd want to know his magic, but anything that I'd share about John Wooden, you would just kind of say, hey, I do that. I think he might have just done it before his time. Anyway, to finish off, I sat with him for, I would say, on these other 98 questions. I said, Coach Wooden, could you briefly comment on your philosophy on these items? And it took 2 weeks. I sat with him from 9 to 3 for 2 weeks. And I had over 1,000 pages. And I was getting it at Brigham Young. And the lady that typed it she had 13 children, and a Mormon lady, and she typed it from 4:30 to 6:30 in the morning, and she'd never been out of Orem, Utah. So I had 1,000 pages, triple spaced, and every time Wooden's name was mentioned, it was misspelled. It was, instead of E-N, it was W-O-O-D-I-N, and Kareem Abdul-Jabbar was cream, like, you know, cream for dairy products. And so then she typed it, and by chance I flew down to Southern California this is about 6 months later, for whatever reason. But I said, well, I'm going to just take this to him so then he can look at it, just the concepts that he shared, to make sure that they were accurate. And I left it there, and I said, I apologize for the typing. And he said, oh, that's fine. And I said, I'll be here for 2 weeks. Call me when it's finished. So 2 days later, he calls my parents' home where I was, and he said, it's ready. And I said, okay. And I go over to his house, and I just get into his apartment, and he got a phone call, and I'm sitting in the den, and I look over at my dissertation, you know, all those, you know, things that were transcribed, and I see red marks everywhere. And I go, oh no. Because also at that time, I had also talked with all of his former assistants. I went all over the United States. And Denny Crum at Louisville, Frank Arnold at Brigham Young, so on and so forth. And he came in and he gives it to me. He goes, Marv, here it is. And I looked through it, and he had changed every I to E on the misspelling of his name, and Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, and also all the proper grammar. And I said, Coach Wooden, I was so embarrassed, and because there wasn't a page, there wasn't like 10 or 20 red marks on it, and what he had done his first few years of teaching in Dayton, Kentucky, is he taught English, and so he went through over 1,000 pages and corrected every single page. And I called you know how doctoral committees are. I called my committee when I got home, and I said, get the committee together. We're meeting, I'm flying up tomorrow and get them together. And they said, no, you have to type it up and submit it to your advisor, who then will schedule this. And I said, no. I said, get the committee together. And there were 5 people there. And I went in, I set that down, and I said, look at this. And they looked at it, and they were like kids in a candy store. And they all wanted copies, not of the book. They wanted copies of his notes on my dissertation. And basically, they just stamped it. And I didn't have to defend anything. They were looking at the red marks, and they were so impressed with him. And I was also. He was and is a great coach. And one of the things last week, I called him. And it's because so many people want his time, want his affiliation with him. I stay away because I just do that out of respect. And I called him last week because every Monday at Pepperdine we have a convocation where we invite speakers to come in. And somebody said, well, Marv knows Coach Wooden, give him a call. And I did. And March 29th is when he's going to come and speak. And I called him, and he said, out of the blue, he said, Marv, he said, congratulations on your championships last season. And it was the same thing. I mean, no idea that he would even be aware of Pepperdine or Pepperdine volleyball when we won. And he said something to me that really, really hit home. He said, Marv, he says, I don't pull for teams. He says, I pull for people. And he says, therefore, I'll always pull for, your team. And it made me feel good. And then he gave a couple of other examples where the old Los Angeles Dodgers had a manager named Walter Alston, and Wooden enjoyed him and liked him, respected him, and he pulled for Walter Alston, and therefore the Dodgers. And now he doesn't really, I guess, know, respect, whatever, Tommy Lasorda, so he doesn't pull for him. And just that statement, he pulls for people, made me feel great, and I think it's something that I, actually when I look at coaches and teams, I do the same thing. I like to pull for people. Anything else about the intro to that? Okay. I'll share some things, and then we can respond maybe, or have some question and answer. He believed that winning and losing was basically done Monday through Friday in training. He also he taught the kids how to every year and to pull on their socks, how to lace up their shoes. And at the camps that he did, I went to his last camp, and there were probably 150 coaches that had worked at his camps, or players that had played for him, or people that had been to the camps in the past, that were going to hear him for the last time show these little 10-year-olds and 5-year-olds, whatever, how to pull up their socks so they wouldn't get a blister. And he takes about 10 minutes teaching you how to put on your socks and shoes. It was kind of neat. He coined the phrase, preparation is the key to success. He would take one or maybe 2 parts of the game every summer, usually one part of his game, and study it. And I remember him talking to me about, he took offensive rebounding, and he got every journal, every article, every book, every chapter, and he found out the top 5 teams in offensive rebounding, and he researched it. Was it because they just had big goons, or was there some technique there? And he would study that part of the game. And he went to Kentucky, and he studied the fast break from one of his biggest rivals, was Adolph Rupp. He went to Cal, and Cal had a coach named Pete Newell who had great defense. Their arch rivals. Wooden went to him and learned from him, and there was an exchange. And he studied every year from 48 to 75. He took one part of the game, or at the most 2 parts, and studied it. And also he wasn't afraid to go to the people that were good. And there was this sharing, at least at that time, of things that worked. When I talked to him, actually I spoke to him 2 times, and once was just prior to the election down there. And the elections, like all elections, they get kind of funny, where instead of just sharing your philosophy, you throw a little dirt on your opponent. And when I spoke to him, he never did that as a coach, and he was opposed to even the commercials. When we talked a little bit about politics, whatever, but he was opposed to the commercials where one product will put down or compare themselves to another product. And as a coach, he never did that with the opposition, the other coach or their team. He was he always was concerned. One of his weaknesses, and he admits to it, and he admitted to it for every year from 48 to 75, was he never got enough information on the opponent. But he kept doing it over and over again, where he just focused 100% on his team. And he said it was a weakness, but I know that it was, he used it as a strength. But he never wanted to be so focused and waiting for something that might not happen. And he was much more concerned about their own performance. I said several times he was very consistent. Recruiting, and I don't know how big recruiting is for your programs, but is that an important part of your program, recruiting? Okay. Maybe not for all of you. I know that some of you coach at different levels, but unbelievable. Okay, the first day, recruiting and player selection, once they're there, how do you select them and what do you have them do? If the assistant coaches who did all of the recruiting, 99% of it, ever got an athlete in the door with him, they said, it's over. We got it made. All right? But there was 1%, let me share this 1%, that they were in trouble. His standards were so high that he would do things like this. The assistant coaches would work on certain players for maybe a year or 2 prior to that recruiting visit. And one time there's an athlete named Marcus Johnson who said, Coach Wooden, what other players are recruiting? And he mentioned three names. Marcus Johnson ends his visit and he leaves and goes back to his home. And Gary Cunningham and Danny Crum said, hey, you forgot to mention Lonnie Shelton. Well, Lonnie Shelton was some 6'9" physical specimen out of Oregon State who was maybe the number 2 kid coming out, something like that. And the assistants worked on it for 2 or 3 years, and then Coach Wooden said, he said, I made a mistake. He said, we will no longer recruit Lonnie Shelton. And the assistant coaches said, what do you mean? He's the biggest, baddest guy in town. We need this guy. And he said, well, I just gave my word to Marcus. And he said, well, just tell him that you forgot. And he said, no, I gave him my word. We will no longer recruit Lonnie Shelton. So the assistant coaches, 2 years worth of work down the drain. They no longer recruited Lonnie Shelton. He had a guy named Alvin Adams out of, I think he was out of Oklahoma, a big white center. And they'd worked real hard getting him there. He always wanted players that wanted to play for him and play at UCLA. He never wanted to have to talk somebody into having them play. So here's this guy, Alvin Adams, sitting in with Coach Wooden, and the assistant coaches are going, "No, we got it made," because he is so good, and you feel his presence that once they got him in, they had it. All right. And he asked Alvin Adams. He says, "Now, what's your major?" And he says, "Well, I'm not sure, and it doesn't really matter." And then he said, "And what other schools are you considering because of academics, whatever?" And he goes, "Well, this is my 16th visit." And Wooden says, 16 visits? And then he took him out immediately, and he said to his assistant coaches, he says, "Alvin Adams is not serious about UCLA basketball or UCLA academics. Let him keep going on his visit, but we will no longer recruit Alvin Adams." And there was another 2 years worth of work done, by the assistants. So 99% was real good, but he has Midwest values. It's just what you see is what you get, and the players sense that over time, and he was great at that. And actually, Diet Pepsi did I have the tape. I think it was 2 years ago when they call it March Madness, where the NC2A tournament starts going. They did a little special, a 15-minute special on John Wooden, and they had all these interviews of former players, and it was kind of neat because a lot of the players keep going back to him, and so they're always around him, and they use a lot of what they learned from him. And they asked Walton and a guy named Swin Nader they interviewed both of them simultaneously about Coach Wooden, and they said that they don't go back because they won, or because they have NC2A champions, or they're NBA stars, or big money, or for publicity. They go back because they know, this is what Walton was saying, they go back because they know where love is, and that's what they felt as players. And I don't think they felt it in his personality, which was I don't know how to say it. I'm saying that the wrong way. Outwardly, he's very formal and very sincere. He's not a real emotional coach, but they could sense that sense of sincere and genuine concern for their welfare. I asked his wife, Nell Wooden. I said, this is about maybe a month before she passed away. I said, "What does Coach Wooden bring home with him? What does he share with you about the tough stuff and the good stuff and the bad stuff about the job?" And she said, "Nothing." And I said, "Oh, come on, he has to bring something home." And she says, "No." So I finished my interview with her, and I went back to him the next day or two, and I said, "Coach Wooden, Nell said that this is her response to the question." I said, "I find it hard to believe." And he goes, "No, Marv," he says, "that's right." He says, "I always knew that what went on in the household and with the family during the day was much more important than what went on in my career." And he said, "So I never brought anything home." And I thought that was pretty noteworthy, and obviously he worked with his assistants and his trainer quite a bit. He believed in fundamentals, conditioning, and team play. That was his magic. Fundamentals, conditioning, team play, and preparation. And he would never get too far from that. And for those of you who've seen that little pyramid of success, everybody should have what works for them. Lessons in life. And this is what he always wanted the players to stand up for what they believed in, to be very principled. And he always said to them, and like somebody told him, he was removed from a game for some behavior in high school, I think, or junior high, and he was the hot shot. He was a great competitor, a great player. He was in the Hall of Fame as a player and as a coach, and he was a great competitor. And so he went down to his coach, who had removed him from the game, and it was toward the end of the game, and said, "Hey, Coach, you put me back in, we'll win this game." And the coach said to him, "Johnny, some things are more important than basketball." And that stuck with him, and he always used that throughout his career. And he always wanted players. He had an open door. A lot of people didn't use it, but he always wanted players to know what they were doing, why they were doing it, and also to believe in, to stand up for what they believed in. And there were lots of stories like this. And at that time, I don't know if you remember the 60s. The 60s in Southern California were, it was anti-establishment, and the players and the students were either burning the administration building or doing sit-ins or sit-ins in the streets in Westwood, and led by Bill Walton. And I remember one time the coaches were telling me about Sidney Wicks, a big, powerful forward that they had, and they were going to play the NC2A championship game against Jacksonville, who had 3 7-footers, Artis Gilmore, whatever. And Sidney Wicks, they got word that Sidney Wicks wasn't going to shave for this last game, and the assistants brought it to Coach Wooden's attention. Denny Crum did, and Frank Arnold, whatever. So it's a pre-match meal, and Coach Wooden sees Sidney Wicks, and he hasn't shaved for a day or two, and he goes, "Sidney, I see you haven't shaved. You know that you'll have to shave before the game tonight." And he goes, "Not tonight, Coach." He goes, "It's all over for Jacksonville, and you're not going to keep me out of this last game just because I haven't shaved." And he said, "Sidney," he said, he said, "I always want you to stand up for what your principles are, what you believe in, and I respect that." And he said, "You had a great career at UCLA. You're one of the best forwards I've ever had, and I'm sorry to see your career end this way, but I also believe in this," and in a real nice way, just presented the situation to him. And Sidney Wicks was as tough as they come. That night, Sidney Wicks was clean shaven, and he had a nice way of listening to the player and sharing philosophies, and some things he stood for. And I'm sure that he had to bend a little bit over the years, but he didn't change. Assistant coaches. I asked him, "Yes, sir."
I have 2 questions about the guy who shaves his beard.
Right.
What do you think that Mr. Wooden will know if he didn't shave his beard?
He wouldn't. Oh, he went to play. Yeah, but he didn't do it in a hard way or like authoritarian way. Oh, he went to. Yeah, he would not have played him if it because he wanted him to stand up for what they believed in. And Bill Walton actually talked to him. They had big discussions about. Bill Walton believed that if he smoked marijuana, it'd be better for his knees, and that was an interesting conversation, I'm sure. His assistants, behind closed doors, he wanted his assistants. Behind closed doors, they were free to have an exchange, and if an assistant suggested something, he would attack that suggestion to make sure that there was some thought behind it, some logic, and that they really believed in what they were presenting. And some assistants couldn't handle that. Some of them were there for 2 years, and every time they would suggest something, would quote attack them, and then they would be intimidated, and until they learned what he wanted from them was to stand up for what they believed in also. Okay. Before we do the question and answer, I'm going to go around and have the second thing that people think of when they think of you. Then we're going to go question and answer. Second thing that people think of you, and we'll start on the left side this time. How do you get your identity? What's the second thing that people think of when they think of you? I'll come back. What's that? Consistent?
Being yourself.
Being yourself?
Exactly.
Respect people around me.
Good.
Survive.
Yeah,
Competent. Fair. Fun.
Mike comes up afterwards, or in between when we're taking a little 10-minute break. Told you I'd tell him this. And he says, hey, that's kind of scary. You're asking, me to say, how do I get my identity, what people think of me. And if this was a clinic that I was running that could somehow be hands-on, I'd leave all your junk, all your pencils there, and then go out, and I would put you in situations that you'd be uncomfortable. You wouldn't want to do it, and I'd say, hey, to be in this clinic, you have to. Maybe you're obese, maybe you can't do anything out there, and I would overload you with information and basically put you in situations that you put your kids in. Scary. It's kind of scary, and we put our kids in scary situations, I think, a lot. It's the second thing, Mike.
Knowledge.
My life is volleyball.
Logical. Always clear and honest. Close to the layers.
Responsible.
What? Discipline. By the way, I'm not a very good disciplinarian. I'm bad. I'm weak at that. In fact, every year I had, not every year, yeah, about once a year I'd bring in a group to brainstorm, and they'd slice me up. And basically, when I'd get to this guy, Doug Beal, I mean, everybody else could say something, but this guy was real good. And so everything was on a 0 to 10. And when it got down to discipline, he'd say, hey, you're a -10. And he would tell me why. And the guy that was running this, like little brainstorming session, I'd always say, hey, make sure that you hear from Doug, because sometimes we don't hear from him. And he goes, the moderator, so to speak, and he goes, hey, he said, if Beal speaks, he said, nobody else will say anything. Good man. Okay. Loyal. Okay, that's 2. 3. What? I know, I want 3. 4? Okay, I got one more. 5. I'll come back to you. I'll come back. Yeah. I said it to Mike that what's happened in some situations, before people respond, I mean, you've already responded at once, they'll say, well, what's yours? And I try to be, I think, simple. I'm basically, in high school I was a woodshop major, and I'm fairly simple, and they know where I am. And one of my assistants is from Poland. His name is Stan Goshiniak, and when he worked at my camps, before he worked with me with the Pepperdine team, the end of this second or third summer, he comes up to me, puts his arm around me, and he says, Marv, he says, I like you. And I said, why's that? And he says, you speak like an Indian. I can understand you. And fairly simple.
Being passionate about sports. Honest.
What was that? Integrity. Yeah, gotcha. Let me go back to Vikings. Are you ready? Okay. Which? What's up? What was it? Loyal. Great. I try to be fair, honest, and open, and I tell them a lot of times parents for scholarships, whatever. Pepperdine is $23,000 for tuition and room and board, and I tell them in the recruiting process, I'll be fair, honest, and open, but not necessarily fair, but I'll be honest and open, and that works, because then I don't have to remember what I say.
Organized.
Hey, you can't dodge this. Okay, well, I'll come back to you. Mark.
Justice. Work.
The question is, what's the first thing that, how do you get your identity? What's the first thing that people think of when they think of you? Okay. Second thing? Moody? Third thing? Okay. Fifth thing? Last thing? Moody? Huh. All right. Okay. I want you to know that as I stand here, that I can sense the talent in this group. I have only talked to a couple of you one-to-one, but I sense the talent, and we're coaches in the same arena, and I don't have any magic. I'm one of us, I guess, and I'll be here, for question and answer, and probably this discussion will come to me, and then I'll put it to somebody that knows the answer. So we're open for discussion. You had some questions? Go ahead.
It's more of a specific question. When you talked quite a bit about Eric Sato, I've always wondered why the U.S. national team had always one specialized player on the team that only did certain defense, like you mentioned him. What's your philosophy about that amongst the team at that level?
The question is that we had a specialized player that only served for 4 years and played defense, and he made the '88 Olympic team Monday through Friday. It wasn't what he could do in the matches, but in training. Sometimes, remember I said success? Okay, here's my Olympic gold medal team, and here's my second team, and we would create some standards of scoring and drills that would push this team. And there were times when this team was losing, and at times when I didn't want them to lose. I wanted them to experience success, not to make it phony, but sometimes I'd have to take Eric Sato out and just say, "Hey, Eric, go get a drink or wipe up the floor," because he was digging everything that the guys were hitting, and or I'd go to the ref and say, "Hey, if it's even, we're going this way," because I want him. He was in practice. He was great, so he made the team based on his work ethic and practice, and that the guys knew that he would upgrade.
Yeah, but earlier you talked about his role on the team. I assume that he knew he was part of the team, that his role was to come in and serve every game and to dig a few balls. What I'm asking you is, what's your philosophy on player selection? Out of 12 players on the volleyball team, what's your philosophy on selecting one that can only do one or two things, as opposed to having picked a 12th player that could replace the verdict or karate if they ever went down?
I guess I didn't. Maybe if I had somebody that was that could play all around, that he might not be there. But it wasn't even close. If I was selecting 1 through 12, he would have been about number 9, and I would have made changes with the other 3 guys. It's a luxury, It's that I was able to have, and I don't know how to respond other than, yeah. You know how he made the team? I'll tell you how he made the team. He was kind of a long-haired hippie with rings in his ears and all that stuff. And he got out of high school, but just barely. And I saw him play, and I knew that he was good. And I said, "Eric, if you come down and try out, get rid of these rings, diamonds, whatever he had, and cut your hair, and stand on your own 2 feet, and keep your mouth shut, and just play, and you'll do well." And there's some expression that keep your mouth shut and let people think that you're dumb as opposed to open it. And he wasn't very sophisticated. Here's how I made the team. he goes up and he's going to spike a ball on this side of the court. All right? And sometimes what people do is they'll spike the ball into the block and they'll bring it up. Okay? And he's a real strong hitter. Well, he hits against this guy named Powers, a real big guy. He goes up and he hits it hard in practice. And then he drops down to the floor and he sets the ball perfect all the way 30 feet to the other side. And Karai jumps up and hits it down for a point. And everybody in the gym kind of said, he's one of us. I mean, he just played, and he kept his mouth shut, and he still does, and he still remembers that advice, but he made it on his ability to play the game, and just a real spontaneous player, and I think all coaches like players like that. Recruiting, okay. If you don't do it, you look bad.
I got one question before we go. One of our players got interviewed on television. He was there with the coach, and he said, the girl asked, well, how did you make the team? And he said, well, I'm pretty good at rebounding, my ball handling skills are pretty good, and I'm the coach's pet.
The coach's pet.
What would you do with that kind of player?
Wait, I got one basketball story before you leave. You might use this on this recruit. No, I'm serious. What would you do with the
What would you do? What would you have done in that situation?
The coach's pet. I know. I tell the guys I like some players more than others all the time, and I always. Al McGuire, the coach at Marquette, he said he always liked to. As he said this in a way, he always liked to have a whipping boy on the team. Somebody he could just, he wouldn't terrorize the big guys, but he'd terrorize the little ones. The players know that I like certain players more than others. And I guess, who did you have to respond to with that? Would you have to respond to somebody? Yeah, I think that my feeling is that happens, and that the players know it. I mean, they know that I like certain players more than others, and but to say that a coach's pet, that's probably putting it beyond a little bit. Is that a reality? Is that right?
No, that's his sense of humor.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
I think the first solution about whipping him is pretty good.
Can I tell you this story?
Okay, go.
Basketball sport camps in the United States are big, right? And I think it was maybe Magic Johnson's camp or somebody's camp. But Sports World, the people I do my camps with, they also did basketball camps, right? And their guest speaker can't make it. Their backup guest speaker can't make it. Their third guest speaker can't make it. And they have 500 kids at this camp. And I'm kind of watching as this director is struggling to get somebody in there. It's all morning long. So finally they get this guy named Mark Landsberger. And he's about a 6'6" white guy who's known for offensive rebounds. So they bring him in to the camp, and they said they're relieved that he's there, and they give him the microphone, and he just stands there, doesn't say anything. And they said, well, Mark, you're known for your offensive rebounding. Can you show us all your great drills and secret to the success? And once they do that, they say, they get him moving to do some drills. And he goes like this, throws the ball up against the backboard and jumps up, goes like that. Then he throws the ball up again, jumps up. He does that not 1, 2, 3, 4. He does that about 5 times. Same thing. And then he walks back and stands in front of the group. And the director was sitting down, panics, and runs back up. And the thing that never fails is a question and answer period with the little kids. And so they open it up for questions, and this little tiny kid says, "What's your number?" And he goes, 213-455-14. Gave him his phone number. Hopefully you don't have too many of those guys.
No, I don't. Have a good day.
Okay, all right. True story. Anyway, basketball guys, Okay, anything for the discussion on? Yeah. Sure. Yeah, we can do it. We're coaches. We can. Yeah.
Je vous félicite de votre conférence, que vous avez vraiment poussée. J'avais des appréhensions quand je suis arrivé ici le matin. J'avais peur qu'on parle beaucoup plus de contenu que de processus. Alors je suis ravi de vous entendre parler beaucoup plus des aspects pédagogiques et des aspects relationnels que l'entraîneur peut avoir avec ses jeunes. Ah, toi tu veux que l'institut?
Parce qu'on va l'avoir quoi à traduire là?
Ok, arrête.
I'm trying.
Il y a un casque qui est là.
Ok. Mike, je passe le casque.
That's all right. We don't need. Just keep going.
I just asked you that when he came here, I mean, he congratulated you for your exposure. And when he came here, he was anxious to know if you will talk about like techniques and tactics more than coaching and process of coaching. And he's very happy about what you said. Puppy.
We're like Indians, so I can handle it. Yeah.
Je suis aussi ravi d'entendre un entraîneur parler beaucoup plus de l'approche positive de l'entraînement que de l'approche négative, dans le sens interagir avec les joueurs d'une façon assez positive, encourager, les renforcer, faire sortir beaucoup plus des comportements positifs.
It's very big to hear a coach who's taking more than positive avenue to deal with the players than more than aggressive or negative approach.
Can I respond to that? Let me respond, and you should go ahead and put the headphones on for interpreting. I don't do a lot of these, but I remember in 1 or 2 summers I did several, and when I started to talk about the coaching process, several coaches in the audience, the football coaches, said, basically the football coaches, who are very macho, they said, oh, that's wrong. He said, the kids today, they're nothing but a bunch of little communists. And that's the way they started. And by the end of the clinic, they came around and said, yeah, maybe I can improve, maybe I can work on things. And there's a little story about a father who comes home every night with his young child. He sits down and reads the newspaper and he relaxes, and the young child is full of, like Felix, Michelle's little boy, just ready to play all the time, and throws a football right through the newspaper. And the dad gets irritated and said, goes and finds something for this little boy to play with over and over again. And finally he goes in, and this little boy keeps irritating the father. And he sees a map of the world, and he tears it into 1,000 pieces and throws it on the floor and says, now put that together, then come back and see me. And he goes and he sits down, just gets seated, and all of a sudden here's the little boy coming. He goes, I thought I told...